Russia's financial trouble are continuing, and the government increasingly has trouble financing the war, while the Danish government is enabling Ukraine to produce missile fuel inside of Denmark. All of this, as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this sitrep about the war in Ukraine. In regards to the incursion of Russian drones into Poland and thus NATO territory, Poland has now confirmed that every single one of these drones was without a warhead. That makes it obvious that this was a test by the Russians, a test of the NATO alliance, not a coincidence. And at the same time, Medvedev, the former Russian president and now member of the Security Council, said that shooting down Russian drones over the territory of Ukraine would be an act of war and an act that would start a war with NATO, so a Russia-NATO war. Another Russian drone has entered NATO territory on the 13th. It was the Romanian airspace this time. The Romanians scrambled F-16 fighter jets, which apparently just have accompanied this drone until it left the Romanian airspace after 50 minutes. So apparently the Romanians watched the drone fly through their territory until it went back into Ukraine to attack Ukraine. The Russians also conducted a double tap attack on the fire brigades in Dnipro Oblast. Double tap attacks by the Russians are unfortunately numerous times confirmed by this point, so this is unfortunately a confirmed Russian tactic. Meaning an initial strike is meant to draw in first aid, first helpers, to then strike those said helpers. The Ukrainians have struck the Kirishi oil refinery in Leningrad. It is the second biggest inside of Russia, and very likely the oil distillery unit has caught fire. The Ufa refinery was also hit. This is, according to what I saw, the biggest refinery in Russia. Don't quote me on that though. And it took significant damage as well, as did a chemical work in Permkrai, obviously used for ammunition and fuel. At this point, it was also hit by the Ukrainians. Well, let's switch to the developments along the front line, and we start off with Sumy. Here we have a Russian mill blogger saying that the Naval Brigade 810 is the last naval infantry unit in Sumy. The rest has been redeployed mostly to Donetsk. It confirms what we talked about here in the past and on the channel, that the Russians likely left the naval infantry brigades as well as the VDV units in Sumy just for refreshing them to reconstitute them before they have been redeployed. There was some kind of wonder why so many units that are considered to be Russia's elite are staying in Sumy without pushing the front line forward. Now we increasingly have the confirmation. We switch, that's it from Sumy. No changes on the ground that can be confirmed. In Kharkiv, it's the same. No changes that I can confirm. We switch to the Eastern Front, and here we have the Russians advancing inside of Kupiansk itself. We have the geolocation of the Russians being at this point, and this is here. So a little bit further in the Ukrainian held territory, the Russian advance has been confirmed. The Russians also advanced close to Stepova, Novoselivka here. We have a geolocation of this as well. At this point here, the Russians were roughly have advanced inside of that tree line. That does not mean they consolidated their positions, but it should probably mean that the gray zone there has to be extended. The Russians, we're getting more details about the pipeline attack that was done here. This is the third time the Russians used pipelines after Avdiivka and Sumy. And here the Russians used a gas pipeline between Liman Pershi up here and Radivka, yeah, that's where the Russians were using it. According to the reports, the Russians used electric scooters or stretchers with rolls, depending on the size of the pipe, and the transfer of their troops had taken 4 days, so they had to prepare resupply points for the soldiers while traversing through their pipes for a full 4 days. The Ukrainians have said that they hit the pipeline and by now it's no longer usable, but that doesn't make too much sense, to be honest. honest, as a pipeline, for it to no longer be usable, it would have to be hit under the Oskil, so it's filling up with water. If you hit the exit point of a pipeline, theoretically the Russians would just be able to dig out at a different point and use that one, even if the first one is covered with dirt. The 10th Army Corps is saying, though, that the exit is under fire control and 3 out of 4 pipelines are flooded. This is obviously a lot more realistic in an assessment that basically they know if somebody exits the 4th pipeline, they can immediately strike that person, whereas the other 3 are flooded and thus no longer reasonably usable. The Ukrainians, according to reports, have also used barbed wire, as we can see here. Barbed wire inside of the pipes. Now, this might sound counterintuitive because nobody's in there to protect the barbed wire from being cut, but if the Ukrainians manage to fix it on one side, it can't be pulled out, and then obviously a Russian soldier would have to cut every single part of the wire to even be able to advance, and if the pieces are lying on the floor, they can still hurt him. So I guess it would have to not just be cut, but evacuated from the pipe, giving the Ukrainians an insane amount of time through to the Russian delay. So that might actually make a lot of sense, especially if the barbed wire is inside a fairly tight pipe. The Russians are intensifying FPV strikes around Kupiansk. It's increasingly more difficult for the Ukrainian logistics. This is something we see at various parts of the front line, that the Russians, especially with the Rubicon units, are focusing more and more on cutting the lines of communication for the Ukrainian forces and thus weaken their frontline positions by making it harder to rotate, by making it harder to resupply them, and obviously by causing losses on the way to that. But that was it from the Eastern Front north of the Seversky Donetsk. In the Seversk direction, I have no changes that can be reported. In the Kosti-Yantinivka region, we have the Russians at Oleksandro-Shultyne. We have geolocations here north of Oleksandro-Shultyne and inside of Oleksandro-Shultyne. This is interesting here, as the Russians are clearly pushing north towards Predetchune, or something like this. I apologize. Roughly to here. So this seems to be aimed at cutting off the Ukrainian forces to the east of it by more or less reaching Stupochki from the south here. That's it from the Kosti-Yantinivka direction. We switch to Pokrovsk, and here the Ukrainians have attacked Russians east of the town of Moskovske. This is here inside this area. The Russians were up to that point, indicating once again that the area here in the south is also under pressure and probably increasingly being pushed in. No, this was actually here. This means that where exactly the Russians came from is unclear, but it seems increasingly that more or less this area is turning into a contested area where the Russians have recently advanced. The Russians have also advanced in Novotoretsk. There they were struck by the Ukrainians. This is geolocated in the northern part or center part, wherever. Here in Novotoretsk, this is not a significant advance, but it shows us Russian offensive operations. This might not have led to any success by them, as the Ukrainian strikes on the Russian soldiers seem to have been successful. Russian naval infantry is attacking there in the region now. So the Russian naval infantry that was initially at Sumy has been redeployed and is now engaging the Ukrainians there. According to Ukrainian soldiers, the Russians initially tried to achieve success with bigger infantry groups, but that led to extremely high losses, and now they've switched to small tactics, to even smaller tactics, with just a handful of men, often just 2 to 3, after heavy losses. So even the naval infantry has no choice to use these tactics in the region of Pokrovsk. That's it for the Pokrovsk region. We switch in the Pokrovsk region further to the southwest, and here we have the Russians inside of Tolstoy. Now, that Tolstoy is probably under Russian control was to be expected according to what we see in the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, but we now have the Russian visually confirmed in the northwest of the town. So at this point here, very likely Tolstoy is now under Russian control. The Russians also entered Iskra again. We have a Russian soldier geolocated ripping off a Ukrainian flag at the easternmost part. There is no indication yet to which degree they have entered the town. There is no indication yet whether they have consolidated inside of the town, but but it seems likely that at least the eastern part or the southeastern part, more or less this here, of Iskra should probably be more considered to be a gray zone than under solid Ukrainian control, as this map would implicate. The further than that, the Russians have also advanced inside of Novomykolaiv here. It's here. Novomykolaiv, and Novomykolaiv is probably under Russian control now. We have the Russians in the southeastern part or in the eastern part, but then we have them in the northern part as well. It's not fully confirmed that they have it under control, but it seems likely that Novomykolaiv has now fallen to the Russians as well. The Russians also advanced at Olhivske. This is to the east of Huliapole. Here at this point. Olhivske, again, close to previous Russian positions, but if we look at the geolocations, now the Russians are inside of the town of Olhivske, so probably Olhivske is at the very least now a contested area, if not under Russian control. The Russians also advanced in Stepanohirsk in the direction of Zaporizhzhia. We have this here, and the geolocation, the latest geolocation shows them in the southern part of Stepanohirsk. That is showing that they've entered Stepanohirsk proper. We had them fighting, both sides fighting about the high rises south of it, which are probably technically a part of Stepanohirsk, but now we have the Russians up here at this point, indicating that at least temporarily they have entered Stepanohirsk, and thus the southern part of the town is probably a contested area. Overall, the overall situation hasn't changed much. The Russians keep up the pressure at various parts of the front line, while their successes in the Zaporizhzhia region is very limited. The Russians continue some advance in the Pokrovsk region here. And around Pokrovsk, the Russians keep up their pressure too without having a decisive breakthrough. The Kostiantynivka region also, the Russians keep slowly creeping forward. No overall change here. Kupiansk, the pipeline, the usage of the pipeline apparently has not given the Russians any decisive edge, as we do not see them advancing overall, having achieved any kind of breakthrough or anything like this. But with them already being in Kupiansk, obviously the situation here is under pressure, and the Ukrainian bridgehead on the eastern part of the Oskil, east of Kupiansk, will increasingly be endangered. That's it from this. We have further reports from Sabotage area by the Ukrainians. Ukrainians say they blew up the railway between St. Petersburg and the railway line between St. Petersburg and Pskov. Their 15 fuel tanks have been destroyed. An engine has derailed. They also hit the railway line between Orel and Kursk. Here they put explosives which were apparently found by Russian soldiers or by Russian sappers. We have here the local governor talking that by trying to defuse them, 2 Russian National Guard men died and a third one was wounded. And in a later post, he confirmed that the third one has died as well. So while this has only delayed trains and not blown one up, this Ukrainian sabotage has killed 3 soldiers, showing us that, and this is getting more and more common now, the Ukrainians clearly increasingly focus railway lines with the vastness of Russia's territory. Small infantry groups that apparently seem to be walking deep inside of Russia are increasingly capable of blowing up railway lines and thus inhibiting and endangering Russia's railway traffic. In the political sphere, we have something more. The Russians have a national deficit that is increasing all the time because of the war, and Russia will likely increase the value-added tax to 22%. This will hit the Russian public directly, obviously, and thus will immediately cause additional inflation, as the businesses will simply hand over the prices to the end customer, and thus the prices for the end customer will immediately rise. From the pro-Ukrainian side, we have some news as well, and very good ones. Ukraine's Firepoint, that's the company that's building the FP5 Flamingo, is building a solid fuel plant inside of Denmark. Denmark is deactivating 20 or overruling 20 laws and regulations, over 20 laws and regulations to enhance and speed up the production The government is promising that they are going to work, that all the regulations will be achieved over time, but they also guarantee that they will do their best to guarantee safety, but to allow for a quick build up of the factory, they immediately start and simply say, we'll take care of the paperwork later. This is obviously showing once again that if there's a will by some government, then there often is actually a way. And that was it for today's sitrep already. Not too much to say today. So if you like the sitrep, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.